On screen, they were part of America's most beloved TV family. But off-screen, it was a different story entirely. George Lindsey, the goofy, lovable Goober, harbored deep resentment toward his co-star Frances Bavier, the gentle Aunt Bee. And now, decades later, the truth behind that hatred has finally come to light. Let's shred their relationship to explore the real reason behind their tension. But did you ever notice tension between Aunt Bee and Goober on the show? Comment 1 for yes or 0 for no down below. Before we get into why he hated her, we need to go back to his life before the Andy Griffith Show. From Alabama roots to America's favorite Goober Pyle, George Lindsey was born on December 17, 1928 in the modest town of Fairfield, Alabama, nestled in the American South. Born to George Ross, Lindsay, a hard-working butcher, and Alice Smith, Lindsay, a woman devoted to family and community. George was raised amid the values of the Southern tradition: faith, perseverance, humility, and a deep appreciation for storytelling and humor. These early influences would go on to shape his personality both on and off screen. While Fairfield was his birthplace, George spent much of his childhood in Jasper, Alabama, living with his grandparents. These years left a profound impact on him. Surrounded by the rhythms of small-town life and grounded by the love of extended family, George learned early the meaning of resilience and the importance of community. Though acting would one day become his calling, his young life revolved around sports, hard work, and laughter. At Walker County High School, George thrived athletically and socially. He was the quarterback of the football team, a role that reflected his natural leadership and competitive spirit. After graduating in 1946, he attended Kemper Military School in Missouri, a brief but formative experience that introduced him to structure and personal discipline. From there, he transferred to Florence State Teachers College, now the University of North Alabama, majoring in physical education and biology, a far cry from the world of theater he would later embrace. At that point in his life, acting wasn't even on his radar. He had set his sights on a future in education or athletics. But, as fate would have it, George began participating in college plays and found himself unexpectedly drawn to the stage. It was here that a spark ignited, one that would eventually pull him toward a career in performance. After graduating in 1952, Lindsay joined the United States Air Force and was stationed at Ramey Air Force Base in Puerto Rico. His time in the military provided a different kind of education, one in discipline, camaraderie, and perseverance. George often reflected on these years as crucial to his personal growth, and many of the stories and characters he encountered during his service would later fuel the humor and authenticity in his comedy routines. Following his military service, George briefly returned to Alabama and began teaching high school science and physical education at Hazel Green High School. Though he was a well-liked teacher and had a steady job, he couldn't shake the pull of the stage. With growing ambition and a belief in his potential, George made a life-changing decision. He would move to New York City to pursue acting professionally. By 1956, he was accepted into the prestigious American Theater Wing, a major step forward for any aspiring actor. The transition to life in New York was not easy. George took on various odd jobs, including working in nightclubs and small theaters just to make ends meet. He appeared in off-Broadway shows and auditioned tirelessly, learning the ropes of the acting world, one humble role at a time. In 1960, he appeared on the game show To Tell the Truth as a nightclub comic who also happened to be passionate about spearfishing, a quirky, down-to-earth persona that instantly endeared him to viewers. His wit, southern charm, and natural comedic timing began to get noticed, and slowly but surely George Lindsey was carving out his place in the entertainment industry. After completing his training at the American Theater Wing, George appeared in several stage productions, including Broadway roles in Wonderful Town and All-American. Though these performances earned him critical respect, it was clear that his talents and perhaps his destiny lay more on the screen than the stage. So, in 1962, George took another bold leap and moved to Los Angeles, determined to try his hand in Hollywood. Once in L.A., he began landing bit parts on popular television shows, a crucial step for any actor trying to break into the industry. He made guest appearances on legendary series like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Daniel Boone, and even the iconic The Twilight Zone. Each role, no matter how small, allowed him to refine his skills and demonstrate his unique blend of humor, sincerity, and screen presence. Then, in 1964, came the role that would define his career and endear him to generations of television audiences: Goober Pyle on The Andy Griffith Show. Originally appearing as the cousin of Gomer Pyle, played by Jim Nabors, George's character Goober quickly became a fan favorite for his lovable, naive personality, wide grin, and signature goofy hat. What started as a recurring role soon blossomed into a central character, and George Lindsey became a household name. Through this role, George tapped into a character that was more than just comic relief. Goober was an everyman. Innocent, well-meaning, and always ready with a joke or a helping hand. Audiences across America saw something of themselves or someone they knew in Goober, and George brought him to life with heart humor and an unmistakable twinkle in his eye. Tension between George Lindsey and Frances Bavier. Now that we have that out of the way, let's delve into the history of The Andy Griffith Show and the unexpected conflict that existed between George Lindsey, who portrayed Goober Pyle, and Frances Bavier, who is more remembered for her role as the cherished Aunt Bee. From the outside, Mayberry appeared to be a harmonious community in which everyone got along with one another. Behind the scenes, however, there was a lot of drama that occurred in real life. Goober Pyle was a loving and eccentric mechanic who could always make people laugh with his silly antics and unique charm. George Lindsey joined The Andy Griffith Show in 1964 and played the role of Goober Pyle from that position. The character of Goober Pyle, who was played by Jim Nabors and had already established himself as a fan favorite, was Goober's cousin. Lindsey did an excellent job of giving Goober that straightforward, good-natured approach, highlighting his humorous faces and notoriously terrible approximation of Cary Grant, which fans adored. However, despite the fact that his portrayal was cheerful and light-hearted, the mood that existed off-screen did not always correspond to what was depicted on television. To millions of television viewers, Frances Bavier was the epitome of warmth, grace, and maternal affection. Her portrayal of Aunt Bee on The Andy Griffith Show offered a comforting, nostalgic vision of small-town American life where home-cooked meals, fresh pies, and kind words were always in abundance. Aunt Bee wasn't just a character, she became a symbol of domestic stability, someone who held the fictional town of Mayberry together with quiet strength and gentle wisdom. But behind the camera, Frances Bavier was quite different from her on-screen persona. Those who worked closely with her noted that she was a deeply private woman, reserved and formal, and at times emotionally distant. While she was respected for her acting ability and the gravitas she brought to her role, she rarely mingled socially with the rest of the cast and crew once filming stopped. One of the most well-known accounts of her off-screen demeanor came from George Lindsey, who played the beloved and goofy Goober Pyle. In his 1995 memoir, Goober in a Nutshell, Lindsey painted a more nuanced picture of Bavier, one that both honored her professionalism and acknowledged the tension that sometimes arose on set due to their very different personalities. According to Lindsay, Bavier maintained a strict sense of decorum while working. She approached her role with deep seriousness and methodical discipline, rarely breaking character and preferring a quiet, focused atmosphere on set. This was in stark contrast to the rest of the cast, particularly Lindsay, Andy Griffith, and Don Knotts, who often treated the filming process with a looser, more humorous tone, full of spontaneous jokes and playful banter between scenes. Lindsay, known for his light-hearted spirit, enjoyed keeping things fun and easygoing between takes. He often told goofy stories, engaged in humorous small talk, and occasionally used colorful language in moments of levity. For most of the cast, this created a familial atmosphere that reflected the closeness and charm viewers saw on screen. But Bavier didn't share in the laughter, at least not openly. She found the joking around and casual tone on set uncomfortable, even disrespectful at times. Her preference was for a more traditional professional working environment. Lindsay described her as rigid not out of cruelty, but to emphasize how deeply committed she was to maintaining a certain standard, a seriousness that sometimes clashed with the laid-back style of her colleagues. Although there was no public feud between Bavier and Lindsay, their working relationship was undoubtedly cool. They came from different worlds. Bavier, a classically trained actress with a Broadway background, and Lindsay, a former athlete and comic actor with a love of improv and playful chaos. While others like Andy Griffith could bridge the gap between structure and spontaneity, Bavier and Lindsay never quite found common ground. Interestingly, in her later years, Frances Bavier reportedly expressed regret about not being closer to her co-stars. In a rare interview before her death in 1989, she admitted that she had found it difficult to navigate the camaraderie and off-camera friendships that came naturally to others on the show. She acknowledged that her strict professionalism may have created distance where there could have been more warmth. Before we dive into what truly pushed George over the edge, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon for more untold stories from classic Hollywood. A turning point on the set of Mayberry, R.F.D. While the set of The Andy Griffith Show was often known for its light-hearted camaraderie and Southern charm, things took a sharp turn during its spin-off Mayberry, R.F.D., when an unexpected and deeply personal conflict unfolded between two cast members, George Lindsey and Frances Bavier. The episode being filmed was titled The Racehorse, a storyline that gave Aunt Bee, played by Bavier, a particularly central role. On that day, as with many others, George Lindsey brought his usual humor and easygoing spirit to the set. He was known for cracking jokes between takes, telling funny stories, and keeping things loose to lighten the atmosphere. Sometimes his language could get a little colorful, nothing unusual for a relaxed set filled with seasoned actors who had worked together for years. But this day would prove different. According to Lindsay's account in his memoir, Goober in a Nutshell, something shifted in Frances Bavier. Whether it was stress, frustration, or an accumulation of long-standing personality differences, she finally lost her patience. Rather than quietly ignoring his jokes or offering a stern comment as she had done in the past, Frances says, "Boss, there's... Das är... Det är synd. Art. She walked straight over to George and, without warning, hit him over the head with her umbrella. And then she did it again. 2 solid strikes right there on set, hard enough that the umbrella itself bent under the force. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Cast and crew members were stunned. Even for those who knew Bavier's reserved and sometimes temperamental nature, the physical outburst was completely unexpected. George Lindsey was left not only physically stung, but emotionally blindsided. He described the experience as one of deep humiliation, especially because it had played out in front of others. He had always seen Frances Bavier as a serious actress, someone whose approach to the craft was worthy of respect, even if they didn't always see eye to eye. But this moment crossed a line. Lindsay recalled the embarrassment of being scolded and struck like a child, an act that shattered whatever cordial or professional rapport they might have still shared. In his own words, he never forgave her for that moment. And he wasn't the only one disturbed by what had happened. Ken Barry, who played Sam Jones on Mayberry R.F.D., witnessed the incident and later expressed how deeply out of line he believed Frances's behavior had been. Barry defended Lindsay, saying that George hadn't done anything egregious enough to warrant that kind of physical reaction. It wasn't simply about a difference in temperament anymore. It was about dignity and respect, and for many on set, that boundary had been clearly crossed. What made the incident even more poignant was that George had never harbored animosity toward Frances prior to that day. He acknowledged her talents, appreciated her contributions to the show, and understood that she was cut from a different cloth than the rest of the cast. She was, after all, classically trained with a background in stage acting, and a strong sense of theatrical decorum. But from that moment forward, something inside him changed. The rift between them became permanent, unhealed by time or reconciliation. Frances Bavier's struggles behind the scenes. The infamous umbrella incident between Frances Bavier and George Lindsey wasn't an isolated clash. In truth, it was just one example of the ongoing tension many cast and crew members experienced while working with Bavier during her time on The Andy Griffith Show and its spin-off, Mayberry, R.F.D. Despite her on-screen warmth and nurturing presence as Aunt B, those who knew her behind the scenes often found her to be a complicated and emotionally guarded individual, someone whose personal struggles created distance and at times outright conflict on set. One notable figure who encountered challenges with Frances was Howard Morris, the actor behind the energetic and wildly unpredictable Ernest T. Bass, who also directed several episodes of the show. Morris once described the difficulty of directing Bavier as akin to stepping on a landmine. He had to tread carefully whenever giving her notes or adjusting her performance. Something as simple as asking her to move a few steps to the left or change her body position could be perceived by Bavier as a personal slight, triggering a defensive or hostile reaction. The tension this created on set was palpable, and Morris often felt he had to navigate her moods delicately, knowing one wrong word could upset the balance of the day's shoot. Even Sheldon Leonard, the show's executive producer and one of the most influential figures in 1960s television, noted that Frances Bavier was the most difficult person in the cast to work with. This was not said out of malice. Leonard fully acknowledged her considerable acting talent and the vital role she played in grounding the emotional tone of the series. But he also recognized that working with Bavier came with emotional volatility and an unwillingness to fully blend with the more laid-back, jovial culture of the Mayberry set. What made Frances Bavier such an enigma was the sharp contrast between her real personality and the character she portrayed. On screen, Aunt B was the epitome of warmth, patience, and homespun charm, a maternal figure the entire town relied on. But off-screen, Frances was often distant, reserved, and occasionally irritable, especially when things strayed too far from the script or from what she considered professional decorum. This duality didn't go unnoticed by Bavier herself. In a 1966 interview, she made a remarkably candid admission, "Aunt B is so much nicer than I am." It was a striking statement, one that peeled back the curtain on the emotional burden she carried as an actress beloved for a role that didn't reflect who she truly was. Bavier seemed painfully aware of the expectations fans had of her, and how far removed she felt from the persona she had crafted on television. It was a disparity that haunted her, and she struggled deeply with the pressure to live up to Aunt B's image in real life. As the years went on, this internal conflict intensified. Her difficulty in forming warm relationships with co-stars wasn't simply about clashing personalities or professional disagreements. It was in part the manifestation of a woman torn between public adoration and private unease. According to reports in her later years, Frances eventually sought psychiatric help to deal with the stress and emotional strain of portraying a character so at odds with her true self. The pressure of maintaining an image that fans adored when she knew she didn't naturally embody that same warmth took its toll. In time, this ongoing inner struggle contributed to her growing isolation. As the rest of the cast bonded, laughed, and shared in the joy of the show's success, Frances remained a figure apart, professional and committed, yes, but never fully immersed in the ensemble spirit that defined The Andy Griffith Show for so many others. The complexity of Frances Bavier's legacy lies in this contrast. She brought to life a character that generations came to love, yet lived with the quiet sorrow of knowing she didn't feel like the woman fans believed her to be. While her co-stars went on to talk about the fun and family-like atmosphere of Mayberry, Frances Bavier remained a solitary figure, talented, respected, but forever misunderstood. George Lindsey's departure from Mayberry, R.F.D. The behavior that Frances exhibited over the course of the years continued to put her at a distance from her fellow actors. At the beginning of the third season of the Mayberry R.F.D., she was no longer a part of the program. The screen did not provide a very detailed description of the situation. The only thing that Sam Goober and Howard said was that Aunt B had gone to see her sister and that she would not be returning anytime soon. In point of fact, however, it appears that her strained relationships with other cast members, particularly Lindsay, were a contributing factor in her leaving. The show continued to go even without Aunt B, but the absence of her was keenly felt by viewers who cherished the role she played. Frances continued to maintain her distance from her former co-stars even after the program had ended. During the year 1986, Andy Griffith and Ron Howard, who had previously portrayed the role of Little Opie, made the decision to give her a surprise visit. However, she declined it. Although she explained that it was due to the fact that she had not been informed of their arrival, many people suspected that there was more to it than that. They claimed that she wished to keep her previous existence as Aunt B distinct from her current life. On the other hand, Frances did make one final move at the end of her life. She contacted Andy Griffith and apologized for being difficult to work with during the show. She conveyed her sadness about the situation. The fact that she expressed regret for her actions afforded Griffith a sense of resolution. Regrettably, George Lindsey was never offered an apology of the same nature, and if he had been offered one, he would have undoubtedly included it in his memoir otherwise. This unresolved tension remained with George for a considerable amount of time after the concert had concluded. He clung to that moment despite the fact that he believed it was unjust and needless. The recollection of the umbrella event and Frances's reaction eclipsed a significant portion of the positive memories he had of working on set, despite the fact that the Andy Griffith program played a significant role in his life, having brought him recognition and garnered him the adoration of his fans. Fans liked Lindsay for his character and his own warm nature, but behind the scenes he felt the weight of that one unexpected encounter with Bavier. Fans loved Lindsay for his character. However, here is yet another story about George Lindsey that has the potential to completely blow your mind. George Lindsey's potential role in Star Trek. According to reports, he was under consideration for the part of Spock on Star Trek. It is possible that Mr. Spock, the rational and sober Vulcan who served on the Starship Enterprise, was actually Goober Pyle, the humorous and straightforward mechanic from Mayberry Studios. This tidbit of information is somewhat shocking, isn't it? In 2006, it was brought to light during an interview piece that was part of TV Land's Star Trek Marathon celebrating its 40th anniversary. The well-known actor, Leonard Nimoy, who played the character of Spock, stated that the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, had considered George Lindsey for the part, when Nimoy stated that several people were left wondering whether or not he was kidding about it. However, there is further evidence to support this claim. During the course of his book, Ernest Borgnine, who played the lead part in McHale's Navy, said that Lindsey himself had informed him that he had declined the job. That is exactly what Borgnine said when he declined the role of Mr. Spock on the television show Star Trek. He said, "My hand to God." To put things into perspective, imagine George Lindsey with his signature goofy smile and Alabama drawl playing the role of the extremely serious Spock. Doesn't it seem like it would be nearly difficult to imagine? In spite of this, it does make some sense. Back in the days before Lindsay became famous as Goober, his life was full of unexpected turns and twists. Not only did he educate high school students, but he also taught science for a period of time. He was a collegiate quarterback. Therefore, it is not too far-fetched to see him in a post that would allow him to put his real-life teaching experience and scientific expertise to use. It is fascinating to know that the Andy Griffith Show and Star Trek shared some links beyond their same production site at 40 acres in Culver City, California. If you are wondering how the notion even came about, it is intriguing to know that the two shows shared certain ideas. It is even possible to find locations similar to Floyd's barbershop in the episodes of Star Trek that are titled Miri and City. On the Edge of Forever, for example. However, if George Lindsey had been cast in the role of Spock, the relationship between the two series would have meant something very different. It is amusing to contemplate the possibilities that may have been. When compared to Spock, who was known for his emotionless attitude, straight face, and sharp logic, Lindsey's Goober was noted for his ability to make lighthearted and ridiculous comedic moments. If Lindsey had portrayed Spock, would the audience have been more interested in him? Do you think he would have been able to bring some of that Southern charm to the role? If Spock had been on the bridge of the Enterprise, perhaps we would have witnessed him performing a Goober dance. All right, perhaps not. But the idea that Lindsay would play one of the most legendary figures in the history of science fiction is just insane. Spock, the renowned figure that we are all familiar with, was ultimately played by Leonard Nimoy, who was the actor that won the job. In the case of George Lindsey, however, the fact that he was ever considered demonstrates that he was much more than simply the mechanic from Mayberry. He possessed a range that shocked even his closest friends and followers. Imagine what happened if he had made a different decision. In the present day, we could remember George Lindsey in a very different way. However, even without Spock, George's career was complete with events that would live long in the memory. Following the conclusion of the Andy Griffith program, George Lindsey continued to play the role of Goober in the spin-off Mayberry R.F.D. As they continued to carry on the heritage of the Mayberry, the program maintained the small-town charm that was present in the original series, and fans of the show enjoyed seeing familiar faces, especially Goober. A life of acting. Up until 1971, when CBS made the decision to terminate the show, Lindsay played the role of Goober. Lindsay continued to go forward even after the Mayberry R.F.D. had come to an end. He appeared on television on a regular basis, portraying characters that were a combination of comedic and serious roles. In 1972, he portrayed the character of Charlie, a highwayman, in an episode of Gunsmoke, titled Blind Man's Bluff. Additionally, he performed the role of the Dove, an escaped prisoner in the film The Rifleman from the same year. This section demonstrated that George possessed a greater range than many would have assumed, demonstrating that he was capable of bringing grit and depth when it was required. Disney, too, saw that George Lindsey has a unique quality. He provided his voice for a couple animated films that are quite well liked. If you pay careful attention, you might be able to recognize his voice in The Aristocats, where he plays Lafayette the dog. Furthermore, he performed the character of Trigger, a vulture henchman, in the film Robin Hood. Additionally, he appeared in The Rescuers as one of the swamp mice on screen. It's possible that children and families that watch these masterpieces are unaware of the fact that Goober was there in their beloved films, delivering amusement in his own unique manner. One of the most significant long-term roles that George Lindsey ever played was on the show Hee Haw, which was a show that was a wonderful match for his background and sense of humor. From 1972 to 1992, George reprised his role as Goober, but this time with a new twist. This time around, Goober was a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more country, and he was a perfect fit for the musical performances and jokes that were told in the barnyard. The television show Hee Haw maintained George in the public eye for 20 years, bringing him in contact with new admirers as well as those who recognized him from the Mayberry series. In addition to his career as an actor, George led a rich personal life. The couple produced 2 children, George Jr. and Camden Joe Lindsay Gardner, as well as 2 grandsons. He married Joanne Herbert, and they had 2 children together. Despite the fact that his marriage ended in divorce, George was able to find companionship in later years with Ann Wilson, a businesswoman from Nashville. Ann Wilson remained by his side until the day he passed away. George Lindsey, who was 83 years old at the time of his death, died of heart failure on May 6, 2012, in Nashville, Tennessee. Oak Hill Cemetery in Jasper, Alabama. The town from whence he had embarked on his journey was the location where he spent his last moments. Charitable Contributions. Beyond performing, George had a strong desire to give back. Over the course of 17 years, he collected more than $1 million for the Alabama Special Olympics through his George Lindsey Celebrity Weekend and golf tournament in Montgomery. He also assisted to raise $50,000 for the Alabama Association of Retarded Citizens. He didn't simply raise money, he also took an active part acting as head coach for the Winter Games at the Minneapolis Special Olympics national competition. George's passion demonstrated that he genuinely cared about assisting others, particularly children with special needs. Education was very essential to him. He established the George Lindsey Academic Scholarships at the University of North Alabama, where he had previously studied. In 1992, the university bestowed an honorary degree upon him in appreciation of his contributions and ties to the institution. His birthplace of Jasper even recognized him by naming a highway after him, demonstrating how much he was liked and revered throughout Alabama. George received several distinctions during his life. In 1995, the Alabama Music Hall of Fame honored him with the Governor's Achievement Award. In 1997, he received the Minnie Pearl Lifetime Achievement Award, which was particularly meaningful because it came from a fellow country entertainment veteran. In 2007, he was honored with the Nashville Association of Talent Directors' First Icon Award. On top of that, George established the George Lindsey Una Film Festival at the University of North Alabama in 1998, a tradition that honors filmmakers every year. So, while most people remember George Lindsey as the funny, charming Goober, his life was far more than just one part. From possible space traveler Spock to voice acting for Disney and persistent charitable work, George's life was full of unexpected turns and meaningful contributions. He is remembered not just for the chuckles he provided, but also for the generosity he showed along the road. Despite their differences, there was no dramatic final blow-up. The two simply drifted further apart with each reunion and special. When Frances passed away in 1989, George didn't attend her funeral. But in later years, he softened. In a radio interview near the end of his life, George said, "Maybe I didn't try hard enough to understand her. Maybe she was just lonely." Behind the charm of Mayberry were real people with real struggles, clashing personalities, and regrets. George Lindsey and Frances Bavier were both beloved in their own way. But their behind-the-scenes conflict is a reminder that even in the most wholesome settings, not everything is as it seems. Do you think George and Frances could have reconciled if they had more time? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from TV history.